Hello, I'm Natasha. Welcome to my channel. If you like my content, then please do subscribe. So today I want to discuss the topic of NATO, and in particular whether NATO is a defensive organisation, which is so often claimed by the West, but I don't think is true. So what does defensive mean by definition? Defensive means used to protect someone or something against attack. Article 5 of NATO provides that if a NATO ally is the victim of an armed attack, each and every other member of the alliance will consider this act of violence as an armed attack against all members and will take the actions it deems necessary to assist the ally attacked. However, have the actions of NATO in the past few decades demonstrated that it has acted in this defensive nature? First of all, I would like to consider the case of the former Yugoslavia, a part of the world which I don't feel garners the attention that it truly deserves. Certainly, I did not know what had happened there until I started reading about it. The US and NATO engaged in a course of militarism to break up the former Yugoslavia into different parts. Their aim was to break up the former Yugoslavia to smaller parts dominated by the interests of foreign companies. NATO bombed Yugoslavia for 78 days. They dropped thousands of cluster bombs, depleted uranium bombs, and they targeted 480 schools and 33 hospitals. The pretext for launching the breakup was the claim that there were over 100,000 mass graves in Kosovo, but after the war, forensic teams spent months in Kosovo and did not find one mass grave. The Rasak massacre in 1999 was the turning point and trigger event for NATO's intervention, but this massacre also turned out to be a hoax. I think it's important to consider what NATO actually did to the former Yugoslavia. During NATO's bombings, only 14 tanks were destroyed, while 480 schools and 33 hospitals were hit. Targeting any infrastructure needed by civilians is a war crime and is prohibited by international law. NATO violated the international conventions on the protection of cultural and historical heritage sites. They damaged 365 monasteries, churches, and other religious shrines. Children made up 30% of the casualties, as well as 40% of those injured. NATO used depleted uranium, which leaves tens of thousands of pounds of radioactive waste to the air, waters, and soil. The US violated the 1949 Geneva Convention, which prohibits bombings not justified by clear military necessity. It attacked chemical plants, natural refineries, processing plants, and other facilities. It destroyed the petrochemical installation in Novi Sad, which caused widespread contamination and adverse effects on the health of the population. 33 hospitals were bombed, including a medical centre in Belgrade, where a neurological institution was hit. At the Institute for Prematurely Born Infants in Belgrade, electricity was lost after NATO attacked a nearby power plant. NATO also bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, which killed 3 journalists and wounded many more. Now, the Balkans is one of the most biodiverse regions in Europe. Bombing the petrochemical facilities unleashed a dense, massive, toxic black cloud. There were almost daily attacks on the chemical industry all over Serbia, which led to toxic substances being burned and transmitted to the ecosystems in the former Yugoslavia. After these bombings, thousands of people fled the city, coughing and complaining of burning eyes. 70,000 people were endangered locally, and women were recommended not to get pregnant for 2 years. Overall, can the actions of NATO in the former Yugoslavia be considered defensive? I would say not. Yugoslavia never threatened NATO. I think it's ludicrous to suggest otherwise. There is no evidence to suggest that the people within the former Yugoslavia were ever under threat or persecution from their authorities at the time of NATO's intervention. NATO launched a widespread military campaign against the former Yugoslavia for its own interests. It breached international law by doing so, and as can be seen, launched a ruthless campaign against the former Yugoslavia and its people, targeting civilian infrastructure, which in itself is a breach of international law. I really think that people who consider NATO to be defensive should actually look at NATO's actions in the past, especially with regards to the former Yugoslavia and subsequent interventions, which I will consider in future videos.